Welcome to the Shipper Update. I'm lead economist Anthony Smith, and it's Friday, so that means one thing. We have a weekend review of the macroeconomic shipper-ish related releases. So starting it off, we have the Ism Pmi. This is the Purchasing Managers Index, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. If you're not, anything over 50 is indicative of expansion mode. Anything below 50 is indicative of contraction. And in green, we have the best index in my mind, of course, is going to be the Flatbed Outbound Tender Rejection Index. A little bit biased here. I love this index. This is going to be our daily capacity measure or gauge for flatbed activity. And so really I look at the two together, of course, because when there is upstream activity for flatbed or for manufacturing, flatbed trailers are a little bit busier. So looking at the two, we see that the Flatbed Outbound Tender Rejection Index hit an all-time high, over 40%. That's something you don't see very often. I think we're just over 41%, and if I'm not mistaken, maybe closer to 42%. So that is a very high number for any mode, but especially for flatbed, and especially during February going into early March. So looking at this number is going to be one to watch closely because we're kind of getting into really a busy season for some of these flatbed trailers. We're looking at construction, we're looking at more manufacturing activity coming on the line. So we're going to be watching this one closely because we are expecting somewhat of a peak soon for manufacturing activity. Not that it's going to slow and just fall off a map, but the growth will continue to increase, but just at a little bit of a slower rate. Right now for the Ism Pmi, we are seeing that it's at a 58.6, so it's over 50, showing that there is indeed expansion for manufacturing. And moving into our next chart here, we can get into some of the subcomponents for the Ism Pmi, and we're going to look at one of the areas, which is going to be the new orders component. So new orders also increased as well, up a pretty healthy amount, 3.8 percentage points. So that is a pretty significant amount, showing that new orders are continuing to come in. So new orders is going to be an important index to watch because it's going to be really indicative of future activity. You look at those new orders placed, and when those new orders get placed, they eventually get produced, and then those produced goods get shipped throughout the country. So it's essentially the roadmap of what's to come. So showing that there is expansion for new orders is showing that there is still a lot of significant buildup for the pipeline that is going to be manufacturing activity. The other big one is going to be backlog of orders. That one had a pretty substantial rise as well in the most recent month, up 8.6 percentage points, showing that after those new orders get placed, sometimes you can't get to them right away, so there's a backlog building. So even after the new orders start to slow down, there is still an amount of backlogs to work through that's going to keep manufacturing busy, and of course those flatbed trailers busy as well. So if you are a shipper upstream and you are starting to see those backlogs building, you're not alone. It's really going to be an industry-wide thing, especially when you get up to those manufacturing levels as well. So looking at this number going into our next chart, we're going to be able to dive into, as I mentioned here, the new orders and the backlogs also building up. And we have another chart after this one because we also had an economic release for the employment update. So we have initial jobless claims, which came down once again. We just had an interview not too long ago with John Kingston, who really kind of did a deep dive into some of the employment areas and what's going on here. So the good news is that we are still seeing employment levels really starting to moderate and come down to those pre-pandemic lows, and it's been there for some time. So 215,000 applicants for initial jobs claims in this most recent week, and if we were to look at those continued claims, we saw a very minor pickup of just 2,000 and out of really the millions of continued claims. So this was not too much of a move upwards for those continued claims. Initial jobs claims still moving downwards. We also got a pretty positive update for the unemployment report. So moving into our next chart here, we have a release as of this morning, and that's going to be the unemployment rate. Looking at the unemployment rate, we saw a previous release that had it at 4%, or 4%. And so looking at that number, we saw that it is now at 3.8. So that is a pretty significant downward movement. And really, we are getting back to those pre-pandemic levels in a very meaningful way. Of course, when you look at these numbers, you want to look at some of the underlying trends as well. That's what it's really all about, not to get too caught off on some of the seasonally adjusted numbers or the headline numbers. But looking at this number, one of the things that I really want to point out for the unemployment rate was that the participation rate is starting to pick back up once again. And so once we start to see those employment rates really kind of start to come down, the thing I was looking at closely was that participation rate, because what does it all mean if you have more workers but there are fewer participation? So looking at that participation rate come back up really means a lot and is showing a growth in the right direction, especially for those consumers and the job market conditions. We're going to need that for these inflationary pressures, so it's going to be important that everyone has a job for sure. The other big thing is over 90% of the jobs have been added back for the overall U.S., so that is a huge win for the Americans and the job markets here. So there, like John Kingston said, there's a lot of bad news out there, but the job market isn't one of them. That's going to do it for the shipper update in the weekend review. Right now, we're going to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.